What's up, football world? I am Bucky Brooks. This is the Bucky Brooks Show, and we're put on by FanDuel Sportsbook. We are going to talk about the craziness that is taking place in the National Football League, and we're not even going to talk about the games that took place this weekend. Great set of games. We have our Final Four. We got the LA Rams taking on the Seattle Seahawks up there with the 12s. We have the New England Patriots traveling across the country to take on the Denver Broncos. The Broncos don't have their starting quarterback, so that changed the dynamic, and we will talk about those games later in the week. But right now, we want to talk about all the news that is going on about the coaches in terms of coaches being fired, coaches being hired, and what is the fallout from all of the changes. I've never seen a time in the National Football League where we have so many jobs that were available at the end of the cycle, 10 coaches moving and shaking, and all of the madness that ensues. And what it means is not only are you have coaches on the move, but you're going to have a bunch of assistants changing locations and destinations, which will make it interesting to see how these final coaching staffs are compiled and what it looks like. But the thing we have to start with first is the Buffalo Bills and the move that sent shockwaves through the league today. Sean McDermott fired after leading the Buffalo Bills on another playoff run. Sean McDermott, who during his time was one of the best coaches in the league, 98-50 record, 8 playoff appearances in 9 seasons, 5 division titles, including 5 straight from 2020 to 2024 for the Buffalo Bills. Even though he had an 8-8 playoff record and was 0-3 in overtime in the postseason, that was a solid performance by all accounts. Helped the Buffalo Bills end an 18-year playoff drought, something that he certainly deserves credit for. Did a great job with Josh Allen and those things. But this was about the perception of the Buffalo Bills hitting their ceiling under Sean McDermott. There's a lot of conversation about the MVP or the reigning MVP, Josh Allen. He is turning 30. Will they be able to get over the hump, and will he be able to get to a Super Bowl? So at this time, ownership felt like it was time for a change. They wanted to go to another level. They felt like Sean McDermott had taken them, and they gave him a lot of credit for what he did, how he established the culture and those things, but they feel like someone else needs to carry them past the threshold. They promoted the general manager, Brandon Beane, to president of football operations. He is going to lead the coaching search. What I'm going to say now is, look, I know Brandon Beane very, very well. We worked together with the Carolina Panthers, so hats off to him for being able to continue to extend up the ladder. I will say that this move puzzles me in terms of the Buffalo Bills and where they're headed and what they've been able to accomplish under a coach who, by all accounts, is one of the top coaches in the league. You don't win the number of games. You don't dominate the AFC East like the Buffalo Bills had dominated during his era without being a really, really good coach who understood not only the X's and O's, but the culture building process that you have to go through to build a consistent winner. The problem that you have with Sean McDermott right now is, unfortunately, the Buffalo Bills have become a little like the Utah Jazz in the 1990s, where the Utah Jazz were always in the conversation. One of the top teams, Jerry Sloan had those guys rolling, and John Stockton and Karl Malone, they were able to run the pick and roll, but they had this person, Michael Jordan and Chicago Bulls, that they just couldn't knock off to earn the title that many would say that they deserve. For the Buffalo Bills, their Michael Jordan was Pat Mahomes, where they just couldn't get past Pat Mahomes in the AFC to ultimately represent the AFC in the Super Bowl. 3 times they faced him in the postseason, lose all 3 of those games. And there have been times where they played great, like Josh Allen may have outdueled Pat Mahomes, should have deserved to win some of those games, but they just couldn't finish the game. And I think everyone's going to talk about the game, 13 seconds left. Pat Mahomes pulls off a miracle. They found a way to win it in overtime, all those things. It changed the overtime rules and all of that. I understand all of those things. And I do understand the frustration that you have in Buffalo with not being able to have a Super Bowl, particularly when you think you have a generational quarterback in the fold and you want to get it while he is in his prime window. As a player who played in Buffalo at the tail end of that 4 straight Super Bowl run, I understand the passion in Western New York. I understand what it is they want to accomplish, particularly as they move into a new stadium. I am just leery of making a change for someone who really held it together pretty well in Buffalo with what I am going to say is the weakest roster that they had in recent memory with Josh Allen at quarterback. And the reason why I'll talk about that is because having long conversations, one, in the league when I was working as a scout, but then post my days working as a scout, talking to Hall of Fame executives, namely Bill Polian and others, they talk about what is essential to being able to be a Super Bowl team. And they talk about Super Bowl teams are traditionally comprised of a group of players where you have 8 to 12 blue chip players. And when I mean blue chip players, I am saying the elite of the elites, top 5 guys at their respective positions, guys that are universally celebrated as some of the best players that you've seen play in their roles. Now, system can elevate some of those guys to a blue chip level, but typically there's a level of talent that they exhibit that you roundly tout them as some of the best players in the league. And when I look at this roster as presently constructed, I see 3. Josh Allen, James Cook, Deion Dawkins. There's no one else on this roster that I would consider to be a blue chip player. They're good players, but blue chip players based on that standard that we talked about, they don't have it in Buffalo. Now, I would say that I would even say this, I believe they overachieved based on what they had on the roster. And part of that was due to Sean McDermott and the way that they managed the game, the way they kept the defense together, and then Josh Allen's wizardry, even though we always say that this wasn't his best year. Passing touchdowns was down. He had 14 rushing touchdowns, which you love, but this wasn't a classic year from a guy who has been an MVP or was coming off an MVP season. To me, Sean McDermott kept this team together with duct tape in terms of the number of injuries they faced, the lack of talent that they were playing with, particularly on the perimeter on offense, and then on the defense side of the ball, where they didn't have the stars to overwhelm opponents. When you don't have stars to overwhelm opponents, then, man, you have to be outstanding when it comes to the execution. You have to be outstanding when it comes to the game planning and being able to expose and exploit the weaknesses of your opponent. The Buffalo Bills did that better than, man, the overwhelming majority of teams. In fact, there were a few teams that could stack up with them in terms of their consistent winning and those things. So to me, it's just troubling in terms of when you have a really good coach, it's hard to move off a good coach because you're not guaranteed to get a better coach. That said, I understand what they're trying to do. You can look at the Pacific Northwest and look at what the Seattle Seahawks did when they moved off of Pete Carroll, a guy who led them to 2 Super Bowls, led them to tons of wins, but they just felt like it needed a refreshing. It needed to be spruced up a little bit because maybe the messaging had gotten stale. Maybe you had accomplished everything that you could accomplish with this group of guys, and you know you have to hit the reset button, and maybe, just maybe, Sean McDermott would prevent you from fully rebuilding or retooling the roster the way that you need to because of his ties to certain players or his beliefs in terms of how this team needs to play to be successful in the AFC. So you move on from him, and now you really make it about Josh Allen and what Josh Allen needs to get done to help this team get over the hump. And I'm going to say this about quarterbacks because everyone in the media is going to tell you that, oh, the quarterback, he should have been able to get to a Super Bowl run because there was no Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Pat Mahomes, yada, yada, yada. But I'm going to tell you, when those guys have had an opportunity to go, or when Pat Mahomes is gone or Joe Burrow is gone, it's because they had a team that was rocking with them. This team simply wasn't good enough to get there. And it's okay to say that, but let's be real about this. This Buffalo Bills team did not have Super Bowl talent on the roster, so we shouldn't have put that expectation on them. Josh Allen has to carry that because we always talk about the quarterback being measured and their ability to win games and that stuff, but it was not going to be in the cards this year based on their roster. I understand where we are right now with Josh Allen. He's going to be in his 9th year in 2026. 15 playoff starts, 8 playoff wins in his career. Most wins by any quarterback who has not appeared in a Super Bowl. So I understand the frustration. I understand what you're trying to get at. And he's in his prime. He's going to be 30. Maybe you have 5 more years of prime Josh Allen based on the way that he plays with athleticism. So you want to find a way to get this done. Who are they going to bring in to get this done that can elevate him? some of the names that have been tossed out there. They're talking about Brian Daboll, but I'm not convinced that Brian Daboll is a better coach than Sean McDermott based on how he's been as a head coach. I just saw him in New York falter. And look, he didn't have Josh Allen, but he still was the head coach of the team that was very talented on the defensive side of the ball. He didn't get it done. He just got fired. So I can't imagine him being able to get them past the threshold. Joe Brady's your offensive coordinator. He's a first-time head coach. Maybe he can find a way to do it, but he was also responsible for this offense, maybe taking a step back. You look on the outside and try and find someone who can do this, but I don't know who we can confidently say that is going to do this and guarantee success beyond the success that Sean McDermott has had. So it's a bit of a risky endeavor, but one that Brandon Beane and ownership wants to take to see if they can get this team over the hump. And I'll close this out by saying, good luck with this. Good luck with it because, I mean, Sean McDermott really kept this thing together. And defensively, I'm going to say the defensive coordinator is going to be the best or the biggest hire that they have to do because whatever they do offensively, whatever they put around Josh Allen is going to be great. But I just know the defensive coordinator is going to have to take maybe a team of lesser talented guys and have them performing at a high level. And I just don't know who is going to be able to X and O it to be able to get this team over the top when I'm looking at the AFC and I'm looking at your division rival, the New England Patriots, who are only going to be better. I'm looking at some of these other younger teams that are only going to get better. How are the Buffalo Bills going to maintain the success that they had under their previous coach while also eventually surpassing it to be a Super Bowl team? We'll see how it looks. Brandon Beane is responsible for it. So let's see how he's able to put it together. The other part of the coaching game that I would say has drawn the most news and the biggest reaction, John Harbaugh going to the New York Giants. New York Giants have been floundering. They've been struggling. They haven't been able to really get it done. And really, when you think about the Giants, they've been their most successful under two coaches, Bill Parcells and Tom Coughlin. Tough, rugged disciplinarians, old school coaches, throwback mentalities, defense first, offense complements the defense. That's how they've been able to do it. Well, in John Harbaugh, they bring a former special teams coach who has been a CEO coach for the Baltimore Ravens, a very successful CEO coach, might I add, a guy who enters next season 180 and 113 as a head coach, Super Bowl winner, a guy who really dominated in the AFC North, a guy who has experience transforming teams and cultures and making them winners. He steps into a situation where you look at the talent on paper, they've underachieved for the last couple of years. The fact that this roster was 7-27 over the last 2 years is a major disappointment when you have like Pro Bowl, all pro caliber players and Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns. You have a draft pick and Abdul Carter is terrific. You have a top choice in Kayvon Thibodeau that should be able to do it. You got other players on the defense side of the ball that are good enough to get you there. You have a promising young nucleus that was hurt, but is promising. Jackson Dart at quarterback, Cam Scatterboo, Malik Neighbors. You have a lot of things that you're excited about in the building. The thing that you don't have is the level of commitment, accountability, and trust that is needed to play at a championship level. What you will expect from John Harbaugh and what you should see from the Giants is a more buttoned-up program, a program that features the discipline, detail, and toughness that you expect to see in New York. You should see a team that plays with some of the fire and passion that we saw from those previous programs that were Super Bowl worthy under Parcells and Tom Coughlin. But more importantly, you get a head coach that knows what he's doing. And I would say all the conversation that came out in Baltimore about him losing his fastball a little bit when it came to player interactions and those things, I think that will encourage him to maybe even go back to his methods when he first took over the Baltimore Ravens. You can Google it, but Google the things from 18 years ago when he took over Baltimore, and they talked about the training camps and the physicality and the toughness and the old school mentality that he brought to the job and how it worked when it came to transforming the Baltimore Ravens into a champion. The New York Giants are definitely getting that version of Harbaugh because he certainly has heard all of the noise about him maybe slacking up and treating some of the guys with kid gloves. Yeah, you won't get that in New York. Those guys can expect to see someone to come in cracking the whip, someone that is going to whip this team into shape, whip this team into championship form, and someone who probably sees a path to the top of the division by just looking around at Philly, Washington, and Dallas and seeing some of the dysfunction that exists within those teams and being able to maybe win in the margins as they rebuild this team. It's important to note Joe Shane, general manager, continues to stay on board. He'll be responsible for the personnel and the picks and those things. They got to get the right players, particularly on the offensive line, to go to the next level. But there is no doubt in my mind they got the right coach in John Harbaugh to get this thing done. So this should be exciting time in New York because they're getting a coach that knows how to build a process-oriented team and a team that eventually will produce the kind of wins that they expect to see in New York. Now, one of the, I won't say most puzzling, I would say maybe one of the more polarizing moves that took place will be Matt Ryan selecting Kevin Stefanski to be the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. Kevin Stefanski, two-time coach of the year, a guy who has 6 seasons on the job in Cleveland, 2 winning seasons, 2 playoff appearances, but someone in the last 2 years who was 8-26. 8-26 with a lot of controversy around the quarterbacks that he was in charge of, whether it was Deshaun Watson, Shedeur Sanders, Dylan Gabriel, all the quarterbacks that ran through there, what he saw with Joe Flacco, all of that. He is someone, though, that is well regarded and well respected around the league for his ability to work with quarterbacks based on his time in Minnesota as a coordinator, the work that he did with some of the quarterbacks that he's had, all of that stuff. So he has a lot of advocates in the media business who said, like, hey, it's going to be much better. He was hamstrung by the things that took place in Cleveland. I will say, okay, we'll see. We'll see how he handles this situation. We will see how someone who gave up play calling twice over the past couple of years handed off the play calling sheet to other coordinators, how he handles it now that he's back in charge of an offense that some would say on paper is loaded with firepower. Bijan Robinson, you have Kyle Pitts, you have Drake London, you have an offensive line that is young and talented. You have a lot of things at your disposal that you like. You have a defense that you'll continue to have Jeff Ulbrich serve as defensive coordinator that showed promise last year with rookies, Xavier Watson, James Pierce, Salon Walker, having success, kind of getting after it. So there are a lot of things that you like about the potential marriage down in Atlanta. The problem that you have in Atlanta is you have a team that hasn't had a winning season since 2027, no playoffs in the last 8 years, and you're counting on someone who had a worse record than the guy that you fired coming in. 8-26 versus 16-18 doesn't necessarily jive, but you have Matt Ryan putting his stamp on it. Now, I understand what Matt Ryan sees in Kevin Stefanski. You see a guy who has kind of gone down this road because the Cleveland Browns were very dysfunctional when he took it over. He found a way to right the ship. He found a way to help Baker Mayfield play well. He found a way to reinvigorate Joe Flacco when Joe Flacco was tasked with coming in there and they were able to get to the playoffs. So he knows kind of how to maneuver and work around quarterback challenges and those things. The Falcons have a quarterback dilemma, a situation they have to figure out when you have Michael Penix coming off an ACL injury that may prevent him from getting on the field right away. You have Kirk Cousins, that blockbuster deal. You're trying to figure out, are you going to part ways with him or what can you do to bring back? So it's going to take an adult in the room to be able to make this thing happen. And it takes someone who can work with a new president and Matt Ryan, who's going to hire a general manager who Kevin Stefanski will have to work with. So there are a lot of moving parts. The positive with Kevin Stefanski, he's had to deal with a lot of moving parts of late, given the situation that he was dealing with in Cleveland. Now he has a fan base that isn't fully on board, and some of that is going to be based on the way that he interacted with Shedeur Sanders. Some of that is overblown. We'll figure that out. Here's what has to happen with Kevin Stefanski. Kevin Stefanski has to sell to his team and to the fan base that he has a clear plan that is going to help this team immediately turn around and ascend to the top of the NFC South. This is a division that is very vulnerable, a division that is winnable, given the fact that the Carolina Panthers won it with an 8-9 record. Tampa Bay Buccaneers have their own problems. Kellen Moore is trying to figure out how to rebuild the Saints. The expectation in Atlanta is you need to win and win right away. For Matty Ice, he probably sees a situation very similar to the one that he inherited when he stepped in Mike Smith was the coach, and they immediately went 11-5, go to the postseason, and have success right out the gate. The reason why you're leaning on Kevin Stefanski is because he's done this. He should have a blueprint to be able to do this. And you're hoping that what we saw the last couple years, he learns from and allows him to have greater success in the Dirty South than he had in the Rust Belt. Time will tell. We will see. But I will say this about Kevin Stefanski. No excuses, no explanations. This is a very talented team that he's inheriting. He has to tweak and retool and do some things. But we should expect to see the Falcons emerge quickly as a top team under his tutelage based on who many say he is and based on the fact that he's a 2-time Coach of the Year. Can't wait to see what this looks like, but it's going to be a topic of discussion that we revisit multiple times here on the Bucky Brooks Show. The next podcast that we have, we're certainly going to break down and preview these games that are coming up in the AFC and NFC championship games, respectively. In the NFC, we got the Los Angeles Rams taking on the Seattle Seahawks, and I am surprised. Plus 2.5 on FanDuel Sportsbook for the Rams. When you look to the AFC, Patriots and the Broncos, New England minus 4.5 according to FanDuel Sportsbook. We understand that. Bo Nix is out. Jarrett Stidham is making the start. All kinds of storylines to explore before we get to next Sunday. But you can best believe that we're going to do that on the Bucky Brooks Show. Make sure you rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you tell a friend to tell a friend. We're quickly about to flip the page on the 2025 season and the 2026 playoffs and begin to talk about the draft because, like many of you, my team is out. Everybody else's team is out. The only thing we can look forward to is who are going to be the next set of stars to help our teams get back on track and advance a little farther than they did this season. Until then, I'm Bucky Brooks. This is the Bucky Brooks Show.